Been waiting all day for this. Man.
It's been shadowboxing before this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know me. You really know me. God. Yeah, it's been a hard day for me. I mean, today wasn't any different, really. I just started looking more into what certain friends and acquaintances of mine have been saying over the last few months about Israel and Ukraine and U.S. foreign policy in general. And I'm going to have to start. I'm not going to end friendships. At least I don't think I should. I've never ended a friendship over politics. I've had friends end their friendship with me over politics, but I've never done that to anybody. This is the first time the Israel-Gaza issue is the first time where I have struggled with friendships with people who are opposing a ceasefire even to this day. 24,000 dead, 11,000 children, and I still am searching and searching every day. I read all their articles, I listen to the podcasts, I listen to the speeches. I'm searching for arguments for why there would be any political issue, any political cause, any nation state that would be worth killing 11,000 children for. I haven't found that. I'm going to leave the country I'm living in if that's what it requires to live there. I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to continue to live in a country that needs to kill 11,000 children in order to survive, according to its own statements. It's not even true, but that's what they say. I'm going to leave. And what's that?
You're leaving the United States?
Oh, well, right. I mean, no, the question is, the argument that Israel makes and that its supporters make is that Israel needs to kill these 11,000 children in order for Israel to survive. The United States is going to survive no matter who it kills, whether it kills, how many it kills. So it's a different question here. Yeah. I mean, I'm not willing to do that. And I'm really quite amazed and appalled. I'm not going to judge Israelis, people living there. I can understand that on that base level. If you were sort of born there, those who chose to move there, which is, I don't know what percentage it is, but it's a huge percentage. And it's amazing how many times you see like an IDF soldier patrolling the West Bank, roughing up some Palestinian teenager kid, with a New York accent or a California accent. The people who chose to move there and stay there and then volunteer in the IDF and all that, which is a big thing among Jewish teenagers, by the way. Huge contingent of Jewish teenagers in America volunteer for the IDF when they're 18, go over there, and they almost always are assigned to patrol the West Bank, which is straight up apartheid cop activities. And again, I urge anybody, just watch any video, just pick any city, any town in the West Bank, and just you'll see on YouTube. There's just countless videos of sort of life in the West Bank, and what it's like, and the checkpoints, and the IDF soldiers, and the patrols, and the constant daily grinding racist oppression, which it just is. And this is the one place in the world where the left is just correct. Like this shit is really still going on. The left in the United States, as we all know, has constantly pretended that the United States is still 1960 or 1950 or 1850, when it's not. It's changed. There is no longer apartheid in the United States. There is no formal legal racism in this country at all, zero. But in Israel, it's the whole damn thing is built on it. The whole thing is still there, and it is a daily constant thing. And then on top of that is, there's regular massacres required, they say. The state of Israel says this. They call it mowing the lawn. Regular massacres in Gaza and the West Bank. And by the way, something like 500 people have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. People don't even talk about this. There's been a rampage of settlers in the West Bank trying to set up new illegal settlements to just de facto colonize the entire thing. It's just unbelievable. But so I want to talk about a couple news items, or I guess one in particular. And then I want to talk about the big picture about why this happens, why Israel has been able to do these things over the last 56 years for sure since the occupation. But the news story for me, the most striking news story, apart from that, every minute there's another kid crushed under a building, but there were what the IDF has been doing in northern Gaza and now in Khan Yunis. They just encircled Khan Yunis, which is in southern Gaza, and from many reports, it is believed to be the center of Hamas headquarters. And Yahya Sinwar, who's the prime minister and the head of Hamas in Gaza, is from there. It's his hometown. Khan Yunis is also very important and notable in Palestinian-Israeli history because in 1948, either 47 or 48, during the Nakba, during the war, it was basically one of the founding massacres of the state of Israel. And in fact, whose father? Sam Husseini. Sam Husseini's father was there. I think it was his father. Yeah, his father was in Khan Yunis during the massacre in 48, I believe it was. They rounded up the sort of what became the IDF, rounded up a bunch of young men in Khan Yunis, including a bunch of teenagers, and just shot them against a wall, and then seized the city. And it's just one of the biggest massacres during that war. So one of the founding massacres. So in Khan Yunis, the same place today, the IDF has encircled it, bombing relentlessly from outside with artillery and airstrikes, but there's now infantry with tanks going house to house, building to building. And what they're doing, in addition to shooting whoever they see, there's so many videos of snipers just shooting women, children, people walking across the street. It's incredible how many videos of those, just the sniper shooting videos alone. That's like a subgenre. They have been methodically, and they've been bragging about this. This is not a secret. They've been doing TikTok videos. IDF soldiers are like dancing around these buildings that they are blowing up. So they're going from house to building and demolishing, setting demolition explosives inside of them. And then from a distance, boom, blown up like entire blocks or huge apartment complexes, universities. So now every single university in Gaza has been destroyed physically. I think all but one hospital is gone. I mean, the buildings physically, and again, buildings don't pose any threat to anybody, right? These were empty buildings. There's no Hamas in there. The IDF is inside the buildings planting explosives to blow them. So this is an attempt at, if they're not trying to achieve the genocide of people, physical genocide, and that's a debate. We can talk about that. I don't care that much. Whether it's technically genocide, what they're carrying out, but they certainly are attempting cultural genocide, and they've basically admitted this. They don't want Gaza to be inhabitable by Palestinians, meaning they don't want Gaza to have anything in it that is welcoming of Palestine, of Palestinian culture, of people. They're trying to eliminate Palestine as a culture and a place symbolically for the people who have lived there. And they've been doing this for weeks in northern Gaza, and they started doing it in Khan Yunis. So they get to Khan Yunis, they encircle it. The IDF sends their infantry in, they clear a neighborhood, and then they start demolishing these whole huge universities and hospitals and schools. And they were, the IDF unit, one IDF unit was in the process of doing this. I think it was on Monday. They had 24 guys inside a building setting explosives, getting ready to blow it up. Super excited. Actually, it's two big buildings. 25 IDF were in there. 2 Hamas fighters, Qassam fighters, come out of a tunnel. They have 2 RPGs between them. Dudes are wearing Adidas tracksuits and flip-flops. They have 1 grenade in each RPG. Boom. 1 RPG goes into the tank that's sort of like guarding this thing. Operation kill both the IDF in that tank. The second RPG goes straight into the buildings where these IDF guys are setting explosives. For some reason, it triggered all the IDF explosives inside those buildings. The whole buildings, kaboom, and the whole thing came down on all 24 of those guys and killed single one of them, crushing them to death. Just like what they've been doing. I have never celebrated the death of anybody. Certainly not conscripts, as these men were. I'm sure some of them volunteered to do what they're doing. And for those men, I don't shed a tear, but I would bet you that, and I know that 2/3 of them were reservists. which tells you something. They're sending reservists inside Gaza. That's but my goodness, the poetic justice. And I haven't seen, I'm sure I haven't seen any video of this. I'm sure there's plenty of evidence of this, but there Palestinians living in Gaza must be pretty happy to serve that bit of justice back to the IDF, to crush some of them under buildings. But it's only 24 compared to 24,000. So what happened was, immediately after this happened on Monday, of course, across Israel, oh my God, what are we doing in Gaza? I mean, there's this outcry. And there was pressure put again on Netanyahu to negotiate some kind of settlement, some release of the hostages, some exchange of hostages for prisoners. There's 6,000 Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners in Israel, and the Hamas is demanding a full exchange of the 100 Israeli prisoners, hostages being held in Gaza, for the 6,000 Palestinian political prisoners being held in Israel. And I haven't looked into the ins and outs of it, but some people say not Netanyahu backed away from the deal at the last minute. There was a 2-month ceasefire on the table for some kind of exchange of hostages. Most people I listen to say that Netanyahu backed out. Of course, the pro-Israel side, that it was Hamas's fault. Netanyahu gave a whole speech, though, explaining, I think it was Monday, in fact, why we can't do this, because it would betray the service of our warriors. It would give Hamas the ultimate strategic victory. It would allow Hamas to accumulate power and then wield another October 7th against us. So, I mean, he's made the argument multiple times that he will not accept any kind of deal for hostages in exchange for a ceasefire, because why would he care about hostages? His political career is on the line here. He knows that as soon as the war is over, he's going to get prosecuted in Israeli court, that most of the Israeli citizenry hates his guts and wants to put him in prison. So the other major news, I guess, but it's really multiple news stories at the same time, and this is really getting quite something. Israel, in 1948, at its founding, the founding war, 1967, the Six-Day War, and 1973, the so-called Yom Kippur War, in which Israel was at war with multiple surrounding Arab nations simultaneously. Pretty intense and scary, They only survived those wars, only won those wars because of what? Because of the support of the West, first the French and the UK, and then, of course, the Americans after that, just pumping in weapons whenever they got into a war with the Arabs. And, of course, the Israelis all claim that they're so heroic because they did all this by themselves. I'm like, are you crazy? You're an outpost of the empire, and you wouldn't exist if the Americans didn't give you everything. So now, though, that was bad, is my point. That was bad. They were surrounded, I think, 3 to 4 different Arab armies encroaching on Israel at the same time back in 67 to 73. Yeah. Now we're looking at 6 fronts, and we're looking at, I don't even know, let's do the count. How many countries are actively, essentially at war with Israel right now? And if you count Gaza as a country, which you may as well, and Lebanon, certainly South Lebanon, controlled by Hezbollah, as a country, which you should, then we're talking about this. We're talking about six, at least 6 countries, I guess. Let's do it. So you got Yemen. They're in the news now, the so-called Houthis, Ansar Allah. God, I'm just so pissed off. I've been listening to podcasts of friends of mine today who have very interesting ideas about this stuff. But anyway, talking about the Houthis as being scumbags and Islamist, wacko, weird job, which, okay, maybe I don't want to live under their rule, but anyway, Houthis are taking over, seizing ships, and also attacking ships in the Red Sea to stop shipping, which is 20% of the global trade in the world. US and the UK are trying to fight back. They've been launching missiles against Yemen, into Yemen. So that's one front. And that's, of course, when I say this, it's not just Israel. This is the Israel-US, and you could say UK, but it's really the Israel-US alliance at war on 6 different fronts right now. So that's Yemen. That's one. Hezbollah is not just in Lebanon, it's also in Syria. very active and very prominent in Syria. In fact, it played a leading role in the Syrian civil war for multiple years. It was fighting against the proxies that were supported by the United States within Syria, the so-called rebel groups, which included Al-Qaeda, supported by the United States. Hezbollah was fighting against them. Oh, and against ISIS, which for a time the United States was supporting as well. ISIS threatened to take over much of Syria, and Hezbollah, and this is widely acknowledged, is the army, came over from Lebanon, fought against ISIS, and saved multiple Syrian cities from ISIS. I'm not saying I'm not saying we should therefore bow down and consider them our heroes, but we should say, whose side do we want to be on in this particular fight? So there's Syria. Then Assad, of course, is also an enemy of Israel, and Israel is very much an enemy of Assad, and they've launched multiple airstrikes in Syria in the last 3 months. So that's country number 2. That's front number 2. Southern Lebanon, which is the center of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as many people, let's see, what has been said? It has the 3rd or 4th largest military in the Middle East. I think that's right. With, did I hear this right? 14,000 missiles, most of which are capable of hitting Tel Aviv. And they also have, they also defeated Israel the last time they fought in Lebanon and drove Israel out of Lebanon. 2000. That was the last time Israel fought a ground war, a real war, was in Lebanon, and Hezbollah defeated them and drove them out of Lebanon. That's a third country, third front. In Iraq, and this is just amazing. Like, so I think it was last week this happened, maybe early this week. We got news that Iranian militias had operating in Iraq had bombed and I guess destroyed what they said was a Mossad base in Kurdish Iraq, northern Iraq. Like, and this was amazing because like this was the first time anybody publicly knew that Israel had a base inside of Iraq. We didn't even know this. So now we found out they're dead and destroyed because Iran took them out. Inside of Iraq, you have that going on. You have multiple militias inside Iraq and Syria, some of them aligned with, talked about this before, Iran, some of them not, some of them Sunni, some of them Shia, some of them both, but all of them united with the aim of driving the United States out of the Middle East. That's what they say. And defeating Israel and driving out the Zionists, of course. But primarily, this is simply a continuation. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Iraq War is not over. This is the Iraq War in its final phase. Because we have troops there still, and these people still don't want them there. And guess what? They're firing missiles at them to get them out. The last remnants. Now, yesterday, I think it was, either state or defense, somebody made an announcement or they made some statement that they were going to begin, get this, withdrawal of those troops from Syria and Iraq because it was unsafe for them now. And then today, though, again, I forget, either state or department came back and said, oh, no. We don't mean that. We're going to stay there. We're going to protect the people, which, of course, it's the Conoco oil fields mostly they're protecting. So we don't know exactly what the U.S. is doing. Now, there's a debate among geopolitical analysts right now about what this means, what the U.S. is doing. Now, they are withdrawing troops from Syria and Iraq, thank God, to some extent. We know that for sure. And they might be withdrawing all of them. The question is whether this is a withdrawal. Like, they're going to leave, just 20 plus years of, blood and treasure and devoted to this place. And they're just going to up and leave. Or they're simply getting those troops out of the way because those troops, think about the geography, right? You got Israel in the west. Then you got Iraq. And then what's after Iraq is Iran. So Iraq is in between Israel and Iran. And what Israel and the US hawks want is a direct war to take out the mullahs of Iran. And they understand that the troops stationed in Iraq are simply in between and would probably get chewed up in any kind of direct fight between Iran and Israel and the US. So, in other words, the withdrawal of the troops, and everyone needs to pay attention to this really closely, is the withdrawal of the troops in Iraq and Syria simply a preparation for a direct war with Iran. And several very smart geopolitical analysts that I follow, most notably Alexander Mercouris, who's right about almost everything, is saying just that. And there's several recent instances of the United States doing something like this, where it looked like they were withdrawing, but it was really preparing the ground for a full-scale war. And then I got friends from Reason Magazine, from other podcasts, from various outlets who are up there on Twitter talking about how Iran has been fighting a war against the United States for months now, and we don't even know it. And the presumption is that how dare these fucking Persians and Muslims and Arabs live all around our military bases over there? Like, the nerve of these people. To have had families for thousands of years on land right next to our military base. Yeah, it's ramping up. So how many fronts is that? How many countries now is that involved in? Libertarians who I know, libertarians who I have worked with, who I'm friends with, who I love or like quite a lot, I see many of them saying these things online about how essentially the United States, what it really needs to do to defeat Hamas is to attack Iran. And Iran is allied with Russia, and Russia is allied with China. And therefore, a direct war with Iran entails some kind of dealings with Russia and China. Another reason the hawks want to do this stuff. So I think that's where we are in the Middle East, meaning that Hamas, wow, did they put a burning stick in the eye of the West? Almost, maybe even more on a par with what Al-Qaeda did on 9/11. Just sent the West into a psychotic spasm that essentially led to the ultimate, demise of the American empire, most likely. I mean, it began on 9/11. The way that the U.S. responded to 9/11, as everyone basically agrees now, began the descent of the American empire. And this, I would say, Hamas's actions on October 7th, again, doesn't even matter what you think about them. I'm just talking just purely in terms of effects, has greatly accelerated this, because if current trends continue, I don't see how the U.S. and Israel, how Israel survives. Honestly, I really don't. I mean, I've been thinking about having my friend Adar Weinreb on the show, or maybe going on his show again and just saying, he lives in Tel Aviv, great guy. He's very informed. There's a bunch of live streams with people in Gaza and Israelis. I mean, he has to be basically a Zionist, but he's very, very open and clear about a lot of stuff. And I just want to say to him and my other friends in Israel, the entire world hates you. Recent polls, I think just a couple of days ago, showed that, get this, 80% of Democrats favor a ceasefire, and 60% of Republicans favor a ceasefire now. I mean, you guys are all alone out there. If you're still, I mean, the idea that Israel still needs to bomb Gaza when it hasn't killed a damn anybody significantly in the military in Hamas. I mean, I've seen evidence of what, 10 or 20, maybe, I don't know, actual fighters being killed, is an amazing position to be taken these days. So, long term, what does this mean for the state of Israel and United States relationship with it? You know, there's a whole world of non-Zionists like me, people who didn't really care one way or the other if Jews tried to have a ethno state in the Middle East. I just was opposed to the US supporting it, and I wasn't going to support it. Made a bunch of us non-Zionists. There's a lot of us like that, by the way. A lot of non-Zionists into anti-Zionists, because it's now very clear that the Zionist project will lead us all into World War III. Eventually, if we let it go, if we let it continue unchecked. I mean, I would say even checked, I think it would lead us into World War III. It's been checked many times by the United States, and look where it's gotten us now. Look where we are now because of this fucking project that began 100 years ago, and which we began supporting in 1967. It has gotten us to this. Killing children has become, killing 11,000 children has become like the seventh or eighth reason to oppose the state of Israel, right? I mean, the seventh or eighth most important reason to be an anti-Zionist. The killing of 11,000 children is actually, yeah, like the fifth or sixth or seventh most important bad thing that Zionism has produced. Because as I said, look, a six-front war in the Middle East, while there's another very hot war just up north in Ukraine, which we have to talk about, while there's another impending war, which might be the biggest of them all in Taiwan, which we should also talk about. And these are all linked because all the major actors in all three of those arenas are invested in all three. Even Israel is invested in all three. The US, Russia, China, they're invested in all three arenas. And so I simply, and the other thing is the Israeli government and the vast majority of the Israeli population wants war with Iran. They want that more than to decimate Gaza, because they see, or they think, that Iran is the source of all their problems. They think that if you didn't have Iran around, you wouldn't have Hamas or Hezbollah around. So that's who we are supporting. That's who we are tied to. That's who right now we are following. And Netanyahu, the Israeli government, and the Israeli people almost unanimously want to take us into a direct war with Iran. So, now is the time that we need to see why it is that the US government is continuing to support this maniacal, self-destructive regime in Israel when 60% of Republicans oppose it and 80% of Democrats oppose it, and then for the rest of the world, it's like 95% are anti-Zionist. Why is it that Israel is still getting support from us? We're the only people other than the UK who support these freaks. And the answer is, and this is why I'm so upset about it, because, we know how intellectually bankrupt Americans are, how little they know about world affairs, about geopolitics, about the politics of the Middle East. We know how little they know. They hear things, they get little pieces of data or analysis or argumentation that's handed down to them from institutions like the State Department and the New York Times. and AIPAC. Where are those ideas supporting the state of Israel created? They are created by a small group of journalists in the United States of America who are the ones who tell Americans Hamas rape children and women and behead people, and therefore we just got to go off on these people. Therefore, we got to just wipe them all out. And the Americans are like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Who's going to be in the Super Bowl? It's a handful of public intellectuals and journalists in this country who have made the state of Israel possible, who have enabled this war, who are responsible ultimately for all of this stuff, because they are the ones who get the American public to vote for these politicians who give a blank check to the state of Israel. And without the United States support, we all know that Israel is done. Done. So it's actually like a few dozen public intellectuals and journalists in the United States who are ultimately the reason why this war is happening, the reason why these kids are being killed. And I'm very sorry to say that there are several of those people, several of those journalists and public intellectuals who are friends of mine and colleagues of mine and associates of mine, who otherwise have, politics I like a lot. And that's why we're friends. But on this, and I need to hear from them why exactly, on this, they've chosen to isolate themselves. No one agrees with them in the world except for the people of Israel and half of the US government. They've chosen to take the side of supporting a political cause, Zionism, that has required the murder, not just of 11,000 children, that's just this last quarter, but of about 200,000 Palestinian people, about 1/3 of whom over the last 75 years have been kids. So, it's not something I want on my political resume. Supported the killing of 11,000 children in 2023. But that will be on the political resume of many, many people. Just like supporting the Iraq War in 2003. You know how some of us never forgot. We know who supported the Iraq War in 2003. We don't forget. It's on your resume forever, Jeffrey Goldberg. It's on your resume forever, Michael Moynihan. It's on your resume forever, Matt Welch. Love you guys, the last two. But Jesus Christ, why should we take you seriously now when you're talking about killing babies in Gaza? You talked about killing babies in Iraq in 2003. Now you want to kill some more babies in Gaza. It's also amazing, the Venn diagram, or not amazing at all, actually, of the people who supported the Iraq War and the people who supported the war in Gaza. It's a perfect overlap. Like the three people I just named, for instance, two of whom identify as libertarians, against state, government, nation states, and against war and militarism, those kinds of people. Yeah, no, they love Israel. Can't get enough of fucking killing Gazan children. So if we identify, and it's not just my friends, of course, as a whole, and there's a few I haven't even named because they're very nice people and I just don't want to call them out, but I have many friends, unfortunately, online who are big, prominent journalists who are paving the way for Israel to do what it's doing. So the only way to stop the killing, I mean, if we care about anything, I would think that killing thousands of children would be the thing where we draw the line. If we want to stop that, I've identified what I'm pretty sure is the ultimate source and cause of it. Without that public intellectual support for the state of Israel, Americans wouldn't even know it exists, much less vote for it. We have to start identifying these Twitter intellectuals, these journalists, these media outlets who are simply really relaying Israeli propaganda to the American public to get them to vote for people like Joe Biden. We need to start identifying them and asking them, what is it that you want and how many kids are you willing to kill for this project of Zionism? How many, like, how important is the state of Israel to you? That how many kids were you willing to kill for that? And again, I've said this many times. Someone said to me, you know, in order for you and your son to continue living in California, you're going to need to kill 11,000 kids next year. I'd say, okay, we're going to leave. I mean, there's no question about that, right? I think I speak for most people, I hope. You got to kill 11,000 people to still live here? Kids? Yeah, I would think that the vast majority of people would say, fuck, are you crazy? Well, Israel is crazy. From our standards, from modern American standards, Israel is crazy. The way we judge sanity, normality, decency, humanity, the state of Israel has been crazy and inhumane and medieval and barbaric since 1948, with no break at all. And that's whether there was a labor liberal government or a Likud conservative government. Doesn't matter. Every single government has slaughtered thousands and many, many children to maintain a Jewish apartheid ethno-state in the middle of a land full of people that they must exclude. And I really would like for there to be at least a ceasefire so that we can start talking about other issues. And that is what I have to say for now.
You see Joe Biden get interrupted 10 times at a rally in Virginia on this topic. And yeah, it was a pro-abortion rights rally. He was speaking on that. And then about 10 times he was interrupted by pro-ceasefire protesters and got dragged out.
Good.
Some media outlets called the protesters MAGA protesters to try to control the narrative. But yeah, everywhere Biden goes, he's getting chance of ceasefire.
It's like LBJ in Vietnam with Vietnam. Hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? Was the chant. And I love someone on Twitter. I got into a little beef with my good friend Rick Perlstein, one of the dumbest, most testosterone devoid public intellectuals you'll ever come across. He's written several major books about like the history of the Republican Party and how evil and fascistic they are. Rick, whenever I ask him questions on Twitter, he likes to say in response, "You fucking idiot." He prefers ad hominems. Anyway, oh God, I'm surrounded by fools. Forgot what I was going to say about Rick Perlstein. No, I know it was someone on one of his defenders. I'm forgetting. I lost my train of thought, and it doesn't matter. So I think we got to do travel. We got to do tours. I want to do tours of Palestine and Israel. I want to do tours of China. I'm talking about organized, unregistered academy trips. People come, we go, and then on these trips, I don't want to be propaganda. I don't want one side. I want to have I'll let like Eli Lake, determine half the schedule. And then we'll get someone else to determine the other. And I mean this. I'm going to go to Cuba, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, everywhere that matters. And we're going to go check it out. Because I feel like I ultimately can't make an ultimate determination on a lot of these questions until I actually go to these places. I just don't think, especially with Palestine, I don't think you can really know and really make a firm determination on it until you actually see the place. We got to do that. And but boy, at least, we have videos now. You have so many videos that show you a whole lot. But man, I'm I'm just upset. I'm very upset. It's people who I've known for a long time, who I'm friends with because of politics, because we vibed on multiple very important issues. I'm talking about Reason Magazine. I've written, I don't know, dozens of articles for them. I did a whole video interview series for them before Unregistered. My first interview series was with Reason TV. It was great. They gave me full latitude. They've been great. They were the first people to review Renegade History way back in the day. Loved it. Nick Gillespie loved it. Nick has been my supporter my whole career as a public intellectual. Matt Welch has been too. He's been my editor many times. I've been on the 5th column 3-4 times, something like that. You know, and so it's and we agree on so many things when it comes to domestic politics, domestic issues, cultural issues, for sure. Free speech, they're always the man. Reason's always there for that. So this is like, it's my people, it's my thought, my people, my family. It's like why so many of us Jews and semi-Jews in America get so upset about Israel-Palestine is because it's our people doing this shit. Like I've known many Israelis and I've known many American Zionists, known many people who have taken the birthright trip when they're 18 and like fell in love with Israel and have been supportive ever since. And that's what's disturbing and troubling. It's like, this is my people doing this shit. And so it's extra upsetting when I hear people who are fancy public intellectuals with major platforms saying this stuff to a large audience who don't know anything. They don't know about the history of Ansar Allah and the Houthis in Yemen. They don't know like about all the Iranian militias splayed across Iraq and Syria. They don't know that. It's hard. Even geopolitical analysts don't know this stuff. And so you get these propagandists who don't even know they're propagandists with these big podcasts, big platforms, spewing this propaganda that's going to get us all killed eventually or ultimately, or get a lot of people killed and just make the world a much less safe place. The Middle East right now is a terrifying place, and it's incredible because as of September last year, the Middle East was relatively quiet and calm, right? That's what we were saying about them. Jake Sullivan gave that infamous interview.
Yahoo gave that speech in September, like saying he's like encouraged by the peacefulness that they've reached with Saudi Arabia, and that that he had like a really bright outlook for the future of relations.
Yeah,
that was like from the UN General Assembly, right? Like,
yeah, that was in 23. I think it was like in the summer of 23. It was just a few months before Gaza.
Yeah,
he gets up, and Netanyahu gets up in the UN General Assembly in New York and holds up a map. He's all cheery and optimistic. Holds up a map of the future Middle East. I think it was even titled that, the future Middle East, and it didn't have Gaza in it. I don't think it didn't have Palestine, didn't have West Bank either. Israel was sort of this unified bloc. And then he just gave a speech today or yesterday, was it? Or recently anyway, within the last week, in which Netanyahu says, Israel must control all the land between the river and the sea. All the land between the river and the sea must be ours.
Which, according to the rules on Elon Musk's platform X, is genocidal speech.
Yeah. So it's okay. It's okay for the Jews to come in, for the not the Jews. It's not, Zionists are not Jews. In fact, Rabbi Shapiro has convinced me that Zionism is anti-Jewish. It is anti-Jewish in so many ways, but the Zionists, it's okay for the Zionists to come in and expel everybody and take over a country. But if the Palestinians talk about being free in that same area, oh, it's genocide and they must be shut down, and that's speech that can't be allowed. And what a bunch of genocidal guerrillas they are, too. And I mean GOR, guerrillas, because it's all racist as shit, too. Oh, God, I'm so disgusted.
My argument against Rabbi Shapiro would be you have a good theological argument that Judaism is a set of laws that are prescribed to a set of people, and that people who don't follow those laws or don't even feel obligated to follow those laws aren't to be considered Jews. But in the same way that you could say the land that is called Palestine has been under many different ownerships and under many different names and disputed, that the Arabs living there aren't necessarily Palestinians. That's not really a valid identity. But once they form together and call themselves Palestinians, then that is their identity. So once enough people self-identify this way, it becomes reality. It becomes who they are.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, right. It's sort of.
But I mean that for Zionists who self-identify as Jews and see those projects as completely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not right. I'm basically uninterested in all the sort of mythological and kind of historical arguments. My people have been here for X number of years. I mean, except for when, like, there's some Palestinian family, on the outskirts of Ramallah with olive trees, and they have records to show this, and they've owned that olive orchard since the 7th century, quite literally. The same family. That's very common. And some Israeli settlers who were from California come in and in the middle of the night burn down all their olive trees, and then beat up the young son who was working the farm in an attempt to I do kind of care about this stuff, but ultimately, no. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, let's talk about who's living there now, who's lived there in the recent past, who is being affected now by particular policies. And let's change it if we don't like it. And so, the arguments for it's just man. So South Africa, right? So South Africa, as of the 1980s, when I was in college in the 1980s, man, that was the issue. Everybody was like really concerned about apartheid in South Africa, and you had to be opposed to apartheid in South Africa. And there was a whole boycott movement, huge boycott movement.
I ain't gonna play Sun City.
Can't right. Was it won't? What was it?
I ain't gonna play.
Yeah. Was it Run DMC? Who was the
leader? A lot. It was like We Are the World, but like Steve Van Zandt and Springsteen's guys were the
little Steven. No, but I know there was a hip hop element to it too. No, was it? I think it was maybe Public Enemy.
Maybe, yeah.
I think it was Chuck D and them, but it was huge, man. And we rocked that song at all of our dances in college too, and we loved it. I mean, the ANC, African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, but in absentia when he was in prison, but originally by him, violent as fuck, terroristic as fuck, killed civilians, tortured people, tortured their own people. Winnie Mandela, Nelson's wife, was known for using the so-called necklacing technique, which was putting a rubber car tire around someone's neck, handcuffing them, dousing it in gasoline, setting the tire on fire. That was the way they killed informants for the South African white government. I'm talking about.
That's Nelson Mandela himself also.
I mean, we know that Winnie did that. Right. Nelson, he's been whitewashed in that way. He's never been pinned with it, but right.
I mean,
not just Winnie. We know that much of the ANC did that kind of thing. They also did lots and lots of bombings. I mean, I'm talking about over 30 years. Very similar shit to what the PLO and Hamas has done. Bombing civilian areas, like in South Africa, killing a bunch of like random civilians. Over decades, many, many bombings like this, just grotesque, targeting of civilians, terrorist acts by anybody's definition. This was the leading militant wing of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And so, but like all during that time in the 1980s, 90s, like, believe me, the ANC always had the moral upper hand. I mean, there was not a single American who ever said, not that I know of, who ever said, "Oh, well, we shouldn't we should therefore support apartheid in South Africa because the ANC are clearly animals who set people on fire and blow up civilians in shopping malls. Oh, well, therefore apartheid needs to continue.
Well, what happened?
I mean, that's what they're saying now.
What happened to South Africa, though? What happened?
Well,
what happened to South Africa once the terrorists got in charge? What happened?
Let's get there in a second. Yeah, no, but I mean, but still, like, okay, fine. Let's say that. So ANC takes control of South Africa in the 1990s. Nelson Mandela is president. He went from being prisoner, and there was apartheid and all this violence, and then just a few years later, dude's president. But I'm saying, like, okay, even now that we know the results of the ANC taking power have not been so good, and I don't know the full extent of it, but it sure looks pretty bad in a lot of ways. Corruption, violence, mass rape, all kinds of shit, bad stuff. Does that mean we should not have opposed apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s? I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like the argument is that Palestinians do not deserve basic civil rights because Hamas and Hezbollah, and PLO have engaged in terroristic, animalistic, barbaric acts. That's the argument. So those people need to be locked up in their prisons forever because a portion of their population chose to do super bad things in response to the oppression. That's the argument. It's incredible. And I'm talking about from people who are like classical liberals too. This is the funniest shit. People who are basically classical liberals who believe that, all people are endowed with natural rights, except for those people over there, except for those brown savages who keep, electing or choosing political leaders who are barbarians, I guess. So South Africa is a great example to think about. Yeah, I mean, will if Hamas took power in Israel, it's not really possible, but if it did, would it?
Imagine you have equal rights, equal voting rights, and the Palestinians vote in Hamas to take over all of Israel.
Sure, right. That's possible. So if that happens, would it be like post-apartheid South Africa? Would it be worse? Would there be just mass slaughter? Would they just round up all the Jews and start shooting them? I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I personally know or know of about a dozen Jews who have lived in Gaza. So Amira Haas is a columnist for Haaretz. She's an Israeli Jew. Her family was wiped out in the Holocaust in Treblinka, I think. Bergen-Belsen in Treblinka. She lived in Gaza for years in the 90s and wrote a whole book about it. And now she lives in Ramallah in the West Bank. And Norm Finkelstein, Max Blumenthal, Dan Cohen, Gabor Mate. There's so many who I know or know of Jews, full Jews who have lived or stayed extensively in Gaza with zero problems. It's kind of crazy. So the anti-Semitism in Gaza is against Israeli Jews. That's real clear. And I think they use Jew as simply a shorthand for Israeli, which makes sense because guess what? Guess how the Israelis identify themselves? They identify themselves as Jews. They're the Jewish nation, they say. So can you blame Gazans for just saying Jew?
Well, I mean, yeah, Hamas is, on their official statements, have said, we don't hate you because you're Jewish. We hate you because you're on our land.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think I've said this before, but the original Hamas charter of 87, 88, when they were founded, is terrible. It's fucking anti-Semitic. It's full of anti-Semitic shit. I wouldn't say it's exactly genocidal against Jews, but it's most certainly anti-Semitic. And it does conflate Jews with Israel and Judaism with Zionism and, bad. They revised that charter in 2017, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. So they have a brand new charter, and read that thing. And I gotta say, I don't disagree with any of it. Maybe I gotta read it again, but like, they go to great lengths, they take great pains in that charter to distinguish between Judaism and Zionism, between Jews and Israel. And they say exactly what you said. Our fight is not with Jews, it's with Zionists and Zionism, which is exactly correct. So
you wanted to talk about Jake Sullivan at Davos and the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, you got a clip?
Well, the clip I have, I mean, the only clip that was really taken from that was him talking about the New World Order and conspiracy pages. Did that wild, but I have the quote that he had. Where he said, "We need a Palestinian state. After the war in Gaza, we need an arrangement that includes normalization, security for Israel, and a state for the Palestinians. This is the only path that can work, not in years, but in the near term, if everyone makes brave decisions and chooses this path." Is that the clip you were looking for? Is that the
well, so he gave a speech at Davos in which he said the most important thing he said in that speech actually was about Ukraine, in which he essentially says that Ukraine, it can't be won. Mm-hmm. The war cannot be won. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for the last 2.5 years, you motherfuckers been telling us not only they can it be won, but the Ukraine is winning and will win. And all we got to do is keep supporting them and they will win. And Russia's losing and Russia's losing and Russia's falling apart and Putin has cancer. And now, it turns out what everybody I listened to was saying was right, which is that no, in fact, Russia's been winning since day one. And has won. Avdiivka just fell to the Russian army. And people don't probably get this, but Avdiivka is incredibly important in all kinds of ways because in 2014, when Donetsk and Lugansk declared their independence in response to the Ukrainian government attempting to impose Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture on those regions, the Ukrainian government assigned the Azov Brigade, made up of anti-Russian fanatic fascists, to take up positions in Avdiivka, which is a town just outside of Donetsk city, and establish an entire line of artillery pieces. I mean, I think it was like a mile long, just artillery after artillery, guns, huge guns. And then they just fired artillery shells into the middle of Donetsk city, night and day, for months. Killed about, I mean, it depends on who you talk to, but somewhere between 10 and 20,000 civilians. And I'm talking about artillery shells into like downtown, Main Street. Boom. Kids, women, shopping, And since then, since 2014, they've stayed there. The Ukrainian military has stayed there, lobbing essentially bombs into Donetsk from Avdiivka. So last week, I think it was, finally, Russia broke through and took the fucking city, destroyed those artillery placements. And they've been fighting to hold it since, but this is the first time Avdiivka has fallen since 2014. So it lifts that horrendous oppression that those people were facing, which makes me very happy alone, because those are the people of Donetsk and Lugansk are the people who I most have solidarity and sympathy with in this whole thing. This war was essentially fought over them and their struggles. I mean, of course, it was fought over NATO and all that, but I mean, the original proximate cause was the genocidal attempts of the Ukrainian government to wipe them out. So this is a great thing. I mean, it's just a great thing for those people. And it also is most likely the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war. Another major strategic city is also either, I think it's fallen or it's about to fall nearby, Kupiansk, I think it is. So, I mean, we've known for a year since Bakhmut fell that we're in the end stage, but that was kind of the beginning of the second stage. Most analysts are saying now that the Ukraine war is beginning its end stage. And what you're seeing now, and this is what people need to be watching, because what is going on in the West is planning. They're beginning to plan for the post-war operations in Ukraine. What are we going to do? So the Russians are going to keep the East. They're going to keep the Donbass. They're going to keep Crimea. And the Zelensky government is splitting apart right now. And so we don't know exactly what government will take shape. But what is happening is the West, and we see this in the media, and we see this in the State Department pronouncements, the West is starting to select its leaders of the future Ukraine, and also starting to think about what they want those leaders to do. And what it looks like, we don't know this, but what it looks like, because there have been multiple glowing media portrayals of this guy in the last few weeks, is that the West has selected this guy Budanov, who was the head of intelligence in Ukraine throughout the war, who was responsible for all of the covert assassinations that Ukraine carried out, including of Alexander Dugin's daughter, Daria Dugina, and the Wagner journalist guy in St. Petersburg that blew up the cafe, killed him. I forget his name. But many, many assassinations like that. All those kind of like covert ops. Budanov was ahead of this. He's done, I'm sure people have seen him. He's incredibly creepy looking. And he gives all these interviews in which he makes these sort of apocalyptic, very scary pronouncements about what he plans to do to Russia. He was also probably responsible for the drone attack on the Kremlin, which did nothing but scare a lot of people. But so the West is pretty clearly positioning him to take over. And Zelensky, just today, I saw this today, he put out a tweet about Budanov, elevating him to some new position, politically, militarily, giving him more power, endorsing him. So Budanov will almost certainly be the successor to Zelensky, and this could happen at any moment. Now, what does the West want Budanov to do? And again, we don't know, but the only thing that geopolitical analysts can think of that Ukraine and the West can do is begin a sustained terrorist insurgency in Russian-occupied Ukraine, in Donbass and Crimea, led by Budanov. And he's the guy for the job because that's what he's done. He's Mr. Covert Ops terrorist guy. That's what he's good at. He was actually, I think he started in special operations in the Ukrainian military. That's all he's ever done. He's never been a commander in the field. He's just been good at doing these kind of like dirty ops kind of things. So, assassinating leaders in Russian-held Ukraine, blowing up particular facilities, that kind of thing. Budanov, we think, a lot of people think, will be doing that, and that's what the next phase of the Ukraine war will be. We don't know this, but just take a look. We'll see. In the next 3 to 6 months, tell me if I'm wrong. That's most likely what's going to happen. There will be some sort of, not a surrender at all, but there will be some kind of acknowledgement that, yes, Russia will continue to hold these territories, but we will continue to fight. And it'll be that kind of terrorist activity because they don't control that country anymore. They don't control that land anymore. The only thing they can do is launch terrorist attacks to sort of, I suppose, convince the people of those regions to rise up against Russia, to stop the attacks, would be the logic. So that's what we're looking at. I think that it's really interesting right now. We do have these three three major fronts, I would call them, in the war for the continuance of the American empire. And those are centered right now. Those fronts right now are Ukraine, Gaza, and Taiwan. That's where it's being fought out. And what's interesting is that, and important, is that certainly in Gaza, we don't know what's going to happen in Taiwan yet, but Ukraine, the West has lost. The US has lost. Russia has won. BRICS has won. The multipolar world has won. The empire has lost. In Gaza, again, we don't know yet. It's not done. But boy, oh boy, it is looking terrible for the empire. 6-front war, 6, 7, 8 countries all in a hot war right now against the US-Israel empire there. Taiwan. So we haven't fought yet. We haven't started this yet, but we're gearing up for it. But, we're talking about the US waging some kind of war against China in Taiwan, which is 20 miles off the coast of China, all the way across the Pacific Ocean. And China is a huge country with a very large and fast-growing military whose Navy and Air Force, every analyst in the world says, will successfully defend any attack from the United States on its homeland. So in other words, the area in the Pacific around China, off the coast of China, is theirs. South China Sea, the area around Japan, that's China's controlling that. No one can, it is from, again, military analysts say this, that no force on earth right now, including the United States of America, can penetrate Chinese naval and air defenses. We might be able to defeat them somewhere else, like if there's a war in Africa over like Chinese ownership of some oil field in Nigeria. Sure, the US can come in and defeat them there. But China proper, their sphere right there in the Pacific, that's theirs. But what we have now is multiple reports of war planners in the Pentagon and, most importantly, in the think tanks like Brookings and Council on Foreign Relations, which is where American foreign policy actually comes from. What they're doing, I'm hearing over and over again, is like night and day. They're sitting down at tables and like doing war plans, war games with China, planning war with China. We haven't been. So Iraq was the last major war the US was involved in. That's 20 years ago. So even the memory of that has faded. But, that's only 20 years ago. Major war, 500,000 US troops were involved there. 500,000 US troops went to Iraq. We had Vietnam before that. That's my lifetime. I remember Vietnam. Also, that was about about 750,000 US troops went to Vietnam. Before that, just about 10 years before that, was Korea. Same numbers. Went to Korea, fought and died. Drafts. Korea, Vietnam, not long ago. Why do we think it's just impossible that the United States will not engage in a full-scale war now, involving hundreds of thousands of our own boys and men? Of course, the United States is capable of doing that kind of thing. We've done it over and over and over again in my lifetime, and certainly in our history. But people get very complacent, and they think it's just not going to happen. And, but you have one major attack or one belief that a major attack has happened by Russia or Iran on the US, and the Americans, Americans, they'll sign up in droves to go to war. they'll sign up in droves overnight because they are a shallow people.
Well, I mean, something I've been talking about, the recruiting crisis. I don't think that's going to happen this time around. I think they're going to conscript their soldiers through economic necessity or through offering illegal immigrants a path to citizenship. Some senators have talked about that's a path that we need to consider, is offering illegal immigrants a path to citizenship if they serve. And, with the military becoming more and more woke, you have General Milley talking about his white guilt. And you have, just the Republican, God-fearing Southern base of soldiers increasingly not enlisting. You have multiple generations of families that have fought in every American war telling their telling their children that, the American government is not for you. This giant DC machine is not in your best interest. Do not join it. You have suicides deterring enlistment as well. So I see a giant restructuring of the military if we're going to go into a full-scale conflict, and then, most of it happening via drones.
Yeah, I mean, that's most likely what's going to happen. I will say, though, yesterday or today, I think it was the recent ex-Home Secretary in the UK, which is their Defense Department, basically, or State Department. The head of it today or yesterday said that the UK should institute a draft to fight Russia.
Mm-hmm.
This is Britain.
Britain is more fanatically anti-Russia than the United States. Yeah,
for sure. But I'm just saying, though. Yeah. I mean, and there's almost no chance that the UK populace will go for that. But this is being put out there by a major British politician now, that they need to have a draft to fight Russia. So it's not that far away, right? I mean, they're the closest to us of anybody in the world, and it's not that far away. Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, look, when I was born, let's see, in 1964, the year before I was born, if you had said, we're going to be drafting boys to go fight in this place called Vietnam, people are like, are you crazy? No one's ever even heard of Vietnam. Where is that? No one cares. No American wants to do that. We're rich. This is like, United States in 1964 was at its zenith. That was at we were at its richest moment. Life was great in America. Incredible wealth. Why would we go? All our kids were going to these elite universities. We dominated the world. And if you had said a year from now, we're going to send 500,000 American boys to a jungle in Southeast Asia to fight communists and die, no one would have believed that. No one did believe that. But that's exactly what happened. It was even worse than that. So, yeah, man, I hear you. I know the trends right now are great in our favor. I mean, kids don't want to join the military. They're unable to join the military because they're too fat and they watch video games all the time.
And they keep lowering the standards for recruitment but it's still not enough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, good, I suppose, in that way, but like it can only last so long. I mean, if people really decide that they're threatened, that they really need to go to war, like in 2001, how many people do you know joined the military in 2001, 2002, right? A lot. So if you had like a bigger attack, and if it was somehow traced to Russia or Iran, I could see it.
Man,
easy.
What was it? There was like an FBI staff letter to Congress today warning about a terror threat. You see that?
No.
Yeah. I think they were just saying, with the amount of immigrants crossing over the border, we have an unprecedented threat of a terror attack. And the precedent of October 7th has already been set, and it might inspire copycat attacks. So that might be the false flag for the global World War III entrance that the State Department's looking for, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know, man. So I got a question for you. Do you have a clip?
Well, I've got a few. They're not necessarily related. I have J.D. Vance when he was campaigning for Trump, and I just wanted to like highlight the absurdity of what's happening in Republican like official foreign policy heads. Like they're being America first, but they're maintaining their China hawk position. So
So I want to talk about Trump and MAGA, not Trump. I want to talk about MAGA. So this is great. Can you play that?
Yeah, this was what J.D. Vance was saying to like differentiate Trump from Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is such a horrible war hawk.
Perfect.
23 seconds. Here we go.
They want to let the Chinese make the weapons that our troops fight, and then they want to send our troops to fight all over the world. That is the Nikki Haley plan, by the way, to ship our economic power overseas and then to ship our young men and women off to fight in wars they don't have any business belonging in. Do we want to go back to that, or do we want to take a step forward with Donald Trump? We want to take a step forward with Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's all it was. Basically saying that there's an economic war with China, and we need to be fighting that, and that somehow Nikki Haley wants to manufacture weapons in China to fight her wars in Israel, and that's why we should oppose the war in Israel. Like, that's the weird logic that he can oppose the war in Israel, I guess, to oppose Nikki Haley, but never actually say Israel.
So that's all horse race shit. That's all because they're in a campaign. JD, this is not principled stuff. This is all just competitive shit.
Yeah.
No, I want to talk about sort of the philosophy of MAGA. The ideology of MAGA, in particular around Israel, but also sort of U.S. foreign policy generally. But Israel, yeah, go ahead.
The establishment, I think, supports these wars, and the Republican establishment always will. And I think Trump has warmed up to him in his first administration, but the base, I think, still has that classic American first, what gets derogatorily called isolationism instincts that they have to appeal to.
Well, no, they're pro-Israel.
Yeah.
And that makes no sense.
Not all of them. I mean, Posovic's good on Israel.
Is he? You keep saying this. I haven't seen that. Is he
been
really?
great on Israel? Yeah, yeah. I mean, he hasn't like called out Israel for causing a genocide, but he's been great on we don't need to start a war there.
Okay. I've not noticed that with him, but generally speaking, though, Trump and MAGA, Steve Bannon, War Room, as far as I can see, I haven't followed them as closely lately, but it looks like they're pretty uniformly pro-Israel. And it makes no sense. I mean, am I wrong? Like, no one on the right should support Israel. There's no right-wing conservative or libertarian reason to support Israel. Everyone on the right should be anti-Zionist.
Unless you believe that Israel is the West and you're a conservative because you're pro-West and you see them as
that's not conservative.
Yeah.
Right. That's my point. I mean, those are fake conservatives, as we know. I mean, so
well, it depends on what you're trying to conserve. And again, I think most of the Republican Party is progressives. Like the world they're trying to conserve is won and created by progressives.
Israel is like the faggiest country on earth. I mean, it's like LGBT central. They're proud of it. They proclaim it all the time. It's hilarious. It's one of the big defenses of Israel by the Friends of Israel all the time. Right?
Republicans often is try opening a gay bar in Gaza.
Yeah, in Hamas, right? Exactly. Hamas throws gays off roofs, which is not even true, but whatever. They're definitely anti-homosexual for sure. But that's the big thing is that Israel is LGBT friendly, and there's gays everywhere, and there's a right. Exactly. Israel, as Dugin says, Alexander Dugin says that Israel is the kind of leading outpost of the Western Empire. And what's the Western Empire in terms of like its domestic content? From a conservative point of view, it's a bunch of degenerates, and Israel like embraces that. the thing that I actually like about Israel is that it's a bunch of degenerates. They're really into drugs, really into partying, great parties, DJs, dancing, like hippie outfits. They're very bohemian, hippie. I like that about Israel. Very queer friendly. Yeah. But conservatives and the idea of like the United States giving money to this country way over there to exist. Also, it's made up of Jews. Why exactly are conservatives and right wingers pro-Jewish? You know,
Well,
there's not one reason I can think of that anyone on the right.
Tennessee says his parents think it has to do with the Bible and Revelations or something to that effect, and they must support Israel. The whole Israel is the name of the country that's in the Bible, so we have to support that country.
So what happened was, right, here's the answer. Here's the reason for that. So in the 1980s, AIPAC and the Israeli government, but AIPAC basically, realized with the rise of Reagan and evangelical Christians that though there was a way to get like all these dumb fuck evangelical Christian Americans to support Israel. And they did this. It was a very concerted campaign. They went town to town, city to city. It was very local. AIPAC had a whole regional campaign. They went from church to church to church, especially in the South, Baptists, all the evangelicals, and made this argument. Hey, we are with you because our enemies are your enemies. Those brown, nasty Muslims, those killer terrorist Muslims, suicide bombing Muslims. We hate them. They're our enemies. So you're with us. Revelation, prophecy, yada, yada, doesn't matter. Judeo-Christian, we're all the same Bible. These are these incoherent arguments.
Oh, like there's like some, the graphs of when words get mentioned, right? And the famous one is like racism skyrocketing after 2012, right? But Judeo-Christian, like little bit of activity like around 1940 maybe, and then skyrockets up in the 80s. And past, as like the Google Trends analysis of when that term came into consciousness.
That's right. That's when all these Christian evangelicals in America found out that they were supposed to be pro-Israel. Before then, trust me, if you went to some Baptist church in Alabama in 1975, they'd been like, Israel, what? That's a bunch of Jews, right? In the 80s, they were told, and I'm talking about AIPAC paid for, sponsored speakers, preachers, ministers to go from church to church to church, giving sermons about how Christians need to support the state of Israel because they stand on the side of the Judeo-Christian West against barbaric Islam. And since then, it's borne fruit because AIPAC's got bank. And they have just convinced so many of these Christian evangelicals that Israel is their cause.
Well, if you're looking for principled conservatives who have an ideological basis of their own, who have consistently opposed the state of Israel, you're going to have to start warming up to people who have never been afraid to be called anti-Semitic.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Like Alexander Dugin, like Owen Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, like Stu Peters or Stu Peters or Keith Woods or
Keith Woods.
Even David Duke, I think, is a Fed, but
yeah.
Those people, the people who
it's the ones who held on to the Christian anti-Semitism of the 1970s, right? Before AIPAC came along, and they just had that good old kind of dumb American anti-Semitism. It's actually healthy sometimes. It's so stupid. It doesn't matter. Like, they don't know what a Jew is for the most part. If Woody Allen walked right by your typical evangelical Christian in Kansas, he would have no idea that Woody was a Jew. It's their political usefulness is the problem, that they end up voting for people who end up killing millions. That's the problem with these evangelicals. The problem with evangelicals is that they're evangelical.
Well,
that's the problem. But
yeah. Again, a lot of conservatives, they're liberals. Like I've seen so many Republicans argue that
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
like
That's it.
mhm.
That's the basic. Dude, exactly right. Is that they bought into over the last 50, 60 years, or were forced into buying into the basic liberal premises, right? They argue about like the outcomes, the causes, the policies, but the premises are the same.
Glenn Beck had that huge Tea Party march in like 2013 or whenever. And that was like on the anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And it was like in the same iconic pavilion in DC and in front of the Washington Memorial. And like,
Sure.
And his whole thesis was the Republican view is the Martin Luther King view of the world. And we represent Martin Luther King's dream, us Republicans.
Every MLK day, what do all the Republicans do? They trot out tweet after tweet about how MLK was really one of us. He was really a conservative. He really was saying what we believe. Oh yeah, they just try to completely.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then feminism too. Look at Nikki Haley.
Mm-hmm.
She's got her second wave feminism all over the place. That her whole beef with Vivek, I think, right? It was all about my heels and you're demeaning me as a woman and this and that as a woman. It's like,
yeah,
what? That's feminism talking, bro.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I think she's getting her money from Democrats, and I think she's getting her votes from Democrats.
Oh snap! Okay.
If you looked at the New Hampshire exit polls, over 25% of the people who voted for Nikki Haley were registered Democrats in New Hampshire.
Okay. The thing is, though, that she loves to fuck men who are not her husband, so I might vote for her.
Mm-hmm. Another vote for infidelity.
I'm sorry. Let me clarify. I might offer my vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. All right, we got to go. So we're going to go to Unregistered Live, which is our weekly hangout on Zoom after Unreported every Thursday night. Right now, go to patreon.com right there, unregistered/unregistered. Become a member, become a patron at any level, and you can join us in our live hangout at Unregistered Live, which happens right now at 8:30 Eastern and 5:30 Pacific. Every Thursday after Unreported. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, for sure.
Very fun. And I hope how many people will be killed between now and next Thursday?
2 mothers an hour, as one Palestinian protester said.
I heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's just the beginning. I mean, Ukraine, it's still going. They're still dying all the time. There's someone right now, like either being crushed under a building in Gaza or dying with shrapnel wounds in a trench in Ukraine right now. And in both cases, we as American taxpayers are directly responsible. Just want to leave everyone with that cheery thought. Go Ravens and Lions, and I want the Ravens and Lions, so that's the most important.
I would like the city of Detroit to have some victories under their belt.
Word.
So, yeah,
it's about time, man.
Yeah,
if their defense can play half decently, they can do it against the fucking Silicon Valley 49ers, which is what their name really should be. Mm-hmm. My home team, I've lost interest in them. I'm all Detroit, baby. Let's go, Jared, who's from the Bay Area. But anyway, all right.
So,
peace. Thank you, man.
Peace.